Jinnah of Pakistan by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 9, Simla, 1929 to 1930. Sarojini Naidu, Bhulabhai Desai, Sir Homi P. Modi, Chagla, Kanji Dwarkadas, and his brother were among those who signed that statement. In New Delhi, at a meeting chaired by Motilal Nehru, including 30 leaders of many parties other than Congress, a policy of general conciliation was called for, together with the grant of general amnesty for political prisoners and the predominant representation of the Indian National Congress at the forthcoming Round Table Conference. This Leaders' Manifesto, as it soon came to be called, further insisted that the Round Table Conference is to meet not to discuss when Dominion status is to be established, but to frame a scheme of Dominion constitution for India. No sooner did Jawaharlal Nehru sign that manifesto than he regretted doing so. However, instead of walking out with Subhas Bose and his comrades, feeling himself an interloper, Jawaharlal now wanted to resign from the presidentship of Congress, which he had just accepted. Gandhi responded to Jawaharlal's anxious ambivalence by insisting, "You must not resign. It will affect the national cause. There is no hurry and no principle at stake. About the crown, no one else can wear it. It never was to be a crown of roses. Let it be all thorns now." Nehru did not in fact resign, but his emotional threat of resignation stiffened both Gandhi and Motilal in their resolve to stand by the Leaders' Manifesto as the most they would be willing to do by the way of accommodating the Viceroy and His Majesty's government. Irwin, however, had secured as much promise of change as Ramsay MacDonald was prepared to offer. Jinnah therefore found himself in an unenviable yet not unfamiliar position of having to try to bridge the gap remaining between both sides. Jinnah, Gandhi, Motilal Nehru, Sapru and Patel met with Irwin at the Viceroy's house in New Delhi at 4:30 p.m. on December 23, 1929. Irwin had just returned from his vice-regal tour that morning, and as his train approached Delhi station, a bomb exploded under one of its carriages. Fortunately, neither the Viceroy nor his escort was injured. Gandhi was first to speak that afternoon, expressing the horror he and those who accompanied him felt at the attempt on His Excellency's train, offering congratulations on their Excellency's escape. He then asked Lord Irwin whether the interpretation of his announcement published in the Congress Leaders' Manifesto, the Round Table Conference is to meet not to discuss when Dominion status is to be established but to frame a scheme of Dominion Constitution of India, was accurate. Gandhi explained that unless agreement was reached on this point, he felt it fruitless to proceed to any other question. Irwin insisted he thought that the wording of his announcement made the position plain. The object of the conference was to thresh out the problems which arose out of His Majesty's government's definite declaration of policy. He then quickly added that here at last was the chance of doing something big and the danger of losing a great opportunity. It was obviously impossible to lay down that the conference was to draft any particular constitution. Irwin argued, but it would have the fullest opportunity to discuss any proposals put before it. He emphasized that the conference would be absolutely free. There would be no closure to the freest discussions. The conference would not, he took it, proceed to definite voting, but would rather follow the lines of the Imperial Conference, a record being kept of the general sense of the members. Mr. Gandhi felt that the Imperial Conference was on a different footing. There, all parties to the discussions were more or less of one mind. At the Indian Conference, this would not be so. However much they argued, they could not reach a policy which would be acceptable to all. It was remarkably prophetic conclusion, coming as it did almost 18 years prior to partition and anticipating hundreds of thousands of man-hours wasted on conferences and in cabinets, and millions of futile words, whether printed on parchment of paper. Gandhi admitted there could be no actual voting at the conference, but he argued that unless the establishment of dominion status could be presumed as an immediate result of the Congress, he could not take part in it. He demanded complete freedom at once and said India was capable of solving her own problems of defense. Motilal agreed, adding that British people exaggerated the difficulties in the ways of the dominion status for India. There was no difficulty about having full dominion status at once, though he did not mean that the Indian form of it would necessarily be exactly the same as any particular form of dominion status already in existence. Lord Irwin thought that unreasonable and looked to Jinnah and Sapru at this point for more effective support. Both reasoned at some length with Mr. Gandhi and Pandit Motilal Nehru. They argued that those who went to the conference would be at liberty to propose dominion status. Supposing from the opposite side somebody pointed out the difficulties that would at least narrow the issues, and the true function of the conference would be to discuss the difficulties in the way of immediate conferment of full dominion status and to argue about safeguards. But Gandhi and Motilal remained true to their promise of Jawaharlal and others, who had signed the Delhi Manifesto, refusing to attend another conference to argue about issues unacceptable to all parties with their divergent perspectives. Pandit Motilal Nehru gave it as his opinion that no Indian would be satisfied with less than dominion status. He saw no difficulties in the way himself, but if there were any, they could be solved after the central point was admitted. India could solve them for herself. The whole crux was the transference of power from Great Britain to India. The bitterness and cold inflexibility later noted by those who went to meet with Jinnah emerged in the wake of this aborted conference more than as an aftermath of Ruffles' death. Once again, he had permitted his hopes to take wing, for what he had arranged, after all, was no negligible affair. He had extracted from Ramsay MacDonald and Lord Irwin no ordinary promise. Within 5 years, perhaps India could have taken her place beside Canada and Australia as an independent dominion helping the progress of the world at large, as Jinnah put it to the Prime Minister, whom he had also assured a great success in response to his announcement. And he had actually brought them all into the same room, though that alone had taken almost 2 months of negotiating. Then to watch everything disintegrate before the stone wall erected by Gandhi and Motilal as spokesmen for Jawaharlal and his friends. How else could it leave Plinth but bitter? Tired, frustrated, furious, alone and bitter. He understood precisely what Motilal meant when he said that he saw no difficulties in the way to winning dominion status. Gandhi had been more forthright, insisting there was, in fact, the lack of unity, and that did present a problem. Motilal, however, was not even prepared to concede that a Muslim problem existed, even as his son would still refuse to admit it 8 years later. Jinnah knew how much they resented him. His mere presence in so select a group, though he had been the most instrumental in bringing it together, must have been singularly offensive to Motilal, for Jinnah was the living reminder to him of why the constitution he had labored so hard to write last year was about to pass into the trash bin of history. Nor could Jinnah have helped feeling as the sun set upon the long and weary afternoon that he was, at heart closer to the Lord Irwin than to Motilal or to Mahatma, seated beside him. He had no Muslim League left to meet with this year. nor would the ocean now dividing him from Congress ever be bridged again. Congress met that week in Lahore. The Complete Independence Purna Swaraj resolution passed at this Congress marked a radical departure for the Indian nationalist movement, now in its 44th year. This would be the last annual session of Congress held during the Christmas holiday. President Jawaharlal Nehru announced, inasmuch as the Congress is intended to be representative of the poor masses, and inasmuch as the holding of the Congress at the end of December involves very considerable expense to the poor people in providing for the extra clothing for themselves and is otherwise inconvenient to them. The revolutionary changes initiated by Gandhi a decade earlier had matured to the point where Congress and its younger generation of leadership wanted no longer to be tied in any way to the British Empire, its habits, institutions, traditions, or timetable. Sunday, January 26, 1930 was proclaimed Purna Swaraj Day by the Working Committee of Congress, and a resolution stating that we believe that India must sever the British connection and attain Purna Swaraj or complete independence was posted and read out to millions across the subcontinent. From his lofty, lonely Malabar hill home, Jinnah watched the rising of this new revolutionary tide lash against official indifference and repression, massed like mighty breakwaters thwart every gateway to India. The irresistible force of those waves would keep shattering themselves against these immovable objects till the tide turned back again. Imperceptibly, the rocks would erode or shift. Some would settle, some would sink. With the next high tide, more of the ocean would break through, and still more with the tide after. Jinnah was wearied, bored by the futility of it all. Was it perhaps time for him to abandon India altogether? For what really kept him there? He could practice law just as easily in London, confining himself to appeals before the Privy Council if he liked. There were enough such briefs in his reach, and they would prove just as rewarding and far less exhausting. Jinnah blamed Gandhi for this sudden outburst of political hysteria, as he publicly characterized the new Congress program. Sapru agreed, writing Jinnah on January 5, 1930, I have today read your interview in the press. I entirely agree with you. The Congress has gone mad, but the worst of it is that in its madness it is going to involve the country in disaster. Sir Taj was ready to start afresh, enthusiastically adding, we must act and act together and with a determination that we will solve our differences. I have no doubt that on this occasion you can be of the greatest possible use to the country. He wanted to organize another all-parties conference and assured Jinnah, I personally think that we should not find it difficult to bring about a settlement of the Hindu-Mohammedan question. But without flattering you, I do say that it is impossible to get a settlement effected without your cooperation and guidance. Jinnah agreed to give it a try, as did Shafi and Mahmudabad. Hindu Mahasabha leaders were also willing to join such a conference after much persuading and cajoling by Sapru. Jinnah selected most of the Muslim representatives to the conference in Delhi that met on February 26, 1930. More than 50 delegates were invited, including leading liberals, Mahasabhites, Christians, Anglo-Indians and Madras Justice Party, untouchables as well as Muslim Leaguers. Early in February, Jinnah met with Madan Mohan Malaviya, the Hindu Mahasabha's leader in the assembly, to discuss communal problems and felt the atmosphere has improved for possible settlement. Yet nothing had really changed since February 1928, except that Congress was not in attendance at the latest futile all-parties conference. Jinnah had not expected much of Sapru's conference. Rather, he focused his own attention on the London arena and pressed Irwin to announce an opening date of the Round Table Conference, urging the Viceroy to send out official invitations. The Mahatma had almost completed his heroic march from Sabarmati to the sea, where he then symbolically made salt in open violation of the British salt monopoly, launching a new nationwide satyagraha. Jinnah feared that the rising tides of satyagraha and British repression would serve only to destroy the fragile constitutional craft he had launched, even before it could clear Bombay's harbour. Why would Irwin not commit himself to a date? His legal instinct sensed the Viceroy was trying to back away from signing the contract they had orally agreed upon. Called back to succor for the Pir Pagan appeal, Jinnah wrote from the circuit house there to Lord Irwin on April 20th. 2 weeks later, Irwin replied, reporting that the Round Table Conference was set to start in October, asking what Jinnah thought of holding the Simla Assembly session in July instead of the usual September. Jinnah felt no useful purpose being served with such a session at all. Anyway, most of the Assembly's elected members had resigned in response to Congress's boycott call. But he wrote Irwin from Sindh, I think I shall get back to Bombay about the end of this month, and if it would suit you, I can run up to Simla for a few days in the first week of June. Gandhi's march from his ashram in Ahmedabad, 240 miles south to Dundee on the sea, had started March 12th and ended April 5th. And with the eyes of the world focused upon this latter-day Moses leading his children of India out of bondage. April 6th was the date set by Gandhi for the simultaneous beginning of the nationwide Satyagraha, when hundreds of thousands of Indians broke the government's salt tax monopoly law by stealing natural salt for themselves from India's thousands of miles of coastline. There is no alternative but for us to do something about our troubles and sufferings, and hence we have thought of this salt tax, Mahatma Gandhi said, speaking at Surat on April 1st. Gandhi was arrested on May 5th and taken to Pune's Yerweda prison, which he renamed Palace and Mandir Temple in his letters. Less than 2 weeks after entering the prison, the Mahatma wrote to Lord Erning, addressing him as dear friend, and began to negotiate with him, reiterating the 11 points he had communicated to Ramsay MacDonald in January, which he deemed essential prerequisites to calling off his civil disobedience campaign before it had started. The first of these was total prohibition. The fourth called for abolition of the salt tax. Others demanded reduction of land revenue at least by 50% and making it subject to legislative control. Reduction of military expenditure by at least 50% to begin with. Reduction of salaries of the highest grade services by half or less. Protective tariff on foreign cloth. Amnesty for political prisoners. Abolition of the Criminal Intelligence Division of Police or its popular control, and the issuance of licenses to use firearms for self-defense, subject to popular control. In a prison interview he granted, Gandhi insisted, I have taken what has been called a mad risk, but it is a justifiable risk. No great end has been achieved without incurring danger. I am an optimist. In 40 years of struggle, I have frequently been told I was attempting the impossible, but invariably I proved the contrary. Soon after that interview appeared in the press, Sapru and Jayakar launched their peace mission with the Viceroy's private approval. Jinnah hoped Irwin was not going to soften on the eve of the Round Table Conference he now viewed as his only ray of political light, guarding it with almost proprietary jealousy. I am very anxious that the names of the representatives who are going to be invited to the conference should not be published till the end of August or the beginning of September, and I may request you to let me see the list of the invitees before you finally decide upon the names, so that I may be in a position to make such suggestions as it may strike me. Of course, it will be for you ultimately to decide who should be invited. This can be done while I am at Simla. The Viceroy had insisted on having his assembly meet in Simla that July, despite Jinnah's advice to the contrary. Jinnah's relationship with Irwin thus became increasingly intimate, but did not always run smoothly. Both gaunt, elegant, and punctilious, these two men were so alike they must have found one another at once attractive and exasperating. Sapru and Jayakar came to the Yarveda prison to meet with Gandhi on July 23rd 24th, and the Mahatma wrote a note for hand delivery for the Viceroy's emissaries to Motilal and Jawaharlal in Naini prison, stating that his personal position is that if the roundtable conference is restricted to a discussion of safeguards that may be necessary in connection with the full self-government during the period of transition, I should have no objection it being understood that the question of independence should not be ruled out if anybody raises it. I should be satisfied before I could endorse the idea of Congress attending the conference about its whole composition. Gandhi sent a covering letter to Motilal on the same day, adding, "My position is essentially awkward, but after all, Jawaharlal's must be the final voice. You and I can only give our advice to him." Then Sapru and Jayakar met with both Nehrus in Naini on July 27th to 28th. Motilal's health had deteriorated since his incarceration in June. He ran a high fever during the long interviews with the two peace missionaries. The elder Nehru did not live another year. On July 28th, Irwin wrote Jinnah to inform him of the Labour government's decision to invite members of London's Liberal and Conservative opposition parties to the round table. Jinnah wrote him in reply stressing, "May I once more urge you not to forget the suggestion I made in the course of our conversation at Simla, that Your Excellency should do your utmost to arrange and be present in London at the time of the conference. I am more anxious and more convinced than ever that it is absolutely essential to the success of the conference." Jinnah also pressed in his letter for the release of more prisoners, especially Khan Abdul Ghaffur Khan, one of his two recommended delegates to the conference from the northwest frontier province, though, as Jinnah noted, he has no or very little knowledge of English language. That lion of the frontier was, however, the most popular leader of the Pathan and would become a staunch Congress ally, soon to be hailed as the Frontier Gandhi. Sapru returned to Naini prison on August 8 to inform the Nehrus that Lord Irwin had no objection to sending them to Pune to meet with Gandhi in Yarveda. 2 days later, a special train rushed them to Maharashtra. And from August 13 to 15, Congress's three leaders met with Sapru and Jayakar inside Mahatma's palace temple cell. Several other members of the Congress Party's working committee, including Vallabhbhai Patel and Sarojini Naidu, joined them. On August 15th, the Congress prisoners wrote to Sapru and Jayakar, concluding that the time is not yet ripe for securing a settlement honorable for our country. Jinnah's anxiety over the fate of this conference mounted as he followed news reports of the Yarveda prison, all parties conference from which he and the Muslim League by his own choice were excluded. He wrote again to Irwin on August 19th what was a most remarkable letter, not only for the impatience and irascibility bordering on petulance it revealed, but because it reflected what was actually a reversal of roles with Jinnah, urging the Viceroy to be more firm and definite in his dealings with the Indian nationalists. Jinnah had taken upon himself, as it were, the full burdens of Viceroy and Secretary of State, internalizing those roles in what he truly believed to be the best interests not only of the Muslim minority but of the entire population of India, Great Britain, and indeed the world. He considered Gandhi quite mentally unbalanced by now, believed Jawaharlal Nehru a dangerous young radical whose judgment could not be trusted, and knew that Motilal's fever was higher since the Yerveda summit. He sensed that the older Nehru will have fallen hostage to his son's more powerful resolve to march towards complete independence. Isolated, cut off from the peace talks entirely, Jinnah saw no ray of hope in India, only in the distant glow of London's Round Table Conference, the thoughts of which sustained him. Lord Irwin wrote to Sapru and Jayakar from his viceregal lodge in Simla on August 28th. I fear, as you will no doubt recognize, that the task you have voluntarily undertaken has not been assisted by the letter you have received from the Congress leaders. In view both of the general tone of which that letter is inspired and of its contents, as also of its blank refusal to recognize the grave injury to which the country has been subjected by the Congress policy, not the least in the economic field. I do not think any useful purpose would be served by my attempting to deal in detail with the suggestions there made, and I must frankly say I regard discussion on the basis of the proposals contained in the letter as impossible. I hope if you desire to see the Congress leaders again, you will make this plain. So ended Bound 1 of the peace talks. Irwin wrote to notify Jinnah of his firm response on September the 1st. Jinnah's reply a week later continued to sound like a communication from a higher official to his subordinate. I am in receipt of yours of the 1st September 1930 and I thank you very much for it. This is just to inform you that I am going to Sindh on a professional engagement tonight and shall return to Bombay on the 18th or 19th. I have now booked my passage for the 4th October in view of the fact that the conference does not meet till the middle of November. More when I return. He had much to arrange in what was to be his last full month in India for several years. Almost 35 years had gone by since his return from London to make Bombay his home. This would-be thespian had reached stardom as Bombay's most successful barrister, a viceroy's alter ego, and the Prime Minister's friend. It was time to go back then to London, not to retire exactly, but to settle in and to enjoy an atmosphere less frenzied, less perilous than India's had become. Ever guarded and secretive about his private life, Jinnah made no pronouncement of future plans on the eve of his departure. Those who knew him assumed, of course, that he was merely packing in preparation for the Round Table Conference, but he was planning his next step up the ladder of the law, to transfer his practice entirely to appeals before London's Privy Council, the highest court in the empire. In mid-August, he had invited Dr. Muhammad Iqbal, 1877 to 1938, to preside over the Muslim League's annual session, which he would not himself attend. He had lost almost as much faith in his Muslim colleagues as in the Hindus. They would agree on virtually nothing. Jinnah was fed up with petty conflicts and nights of endless argument. The Round Table would serve as the settling for his final act on British India's political stage. And should the curtain there descend on the flop, at least that would leave him in London.